Paris Jackson grew up inside one of the most famous families on Earth. Yet some of her strongest memories are not about concerts or red carpets. They are about a father she says she knew in a deeply personal way, a childhood surrounded by unusual rules, and a private world the public could never fully see. Years later, Paris began speaking more openly about that childhood, but her version of Michael Jackson is very different from the image created by headlines, rumors, and controversy. What if the most important thing Paris Jackson remembers about Neverland is not what was there, but what she was taught about it? To the public, Neverland looked like a child's dream. The California state had amusement rides, a movie theater, animals, and enormous open spaces. But Paris has explained that her childhood there was not simply an endless vacation. In a recent interview, she described a surprisingly structured life. She and her brothers were homeschooled, had chores and homework, and could earn special activities as rewards for good behavior. Going on the rides or visiting the animals was not something they could simply demand whenever they wanted. That detail matters because it is very different from the image many people had of Michael Jackson's home. Paris has also said that when she was very young, she did not really understand how famous her father was. To her, he was not a global superstar. He was Dad. In a 2017 Rolling Stone interview, she remembered spending her early childhood at Neverland and described a world where her father and brothers were the center of her life. She recalled having school, following rules, and receiving special outings when she behaved well. And Michael's parenting was not limited to keeping his children entertained. Paris remembered him teaching her how to cook, introducing her to many different kinds of music, and encouraging education. She also described him as someone who wanted his children to think openly and understand the world beyond the version presented in simple textbooks. There was another unusual part of their childhood. Because of Michael's enormous fame, Paris and her brothers could not live like ordinary children. Their fathers sometimes had them wear masks in public to protect their identities. What seemed strange to Paris as a child later made more sense, as she understood just how intensely the world watched her family. But there was something even more complicated happening inside that protected world. Paris was growing up while her father was dealing with intense public controversy. She has said that as a child, she became aware that many people hated or judged him, even though that was completely different from a father she knew at home. So there were really two Michael Jacksons in Paris's childhood. There was the man the world argued about, and there was a father who cooked with her, taught her, played with her, and made her feel protected. For Paris, those two images did not fit together easily, and eventually, the outside world became impossible for her to ignore, because behind the gates of Neverland was a little girl who thought her father was simply Dad. Outside those gates was a world determined to turn him into something much more complicated. And the moment Paris began to understand that difference would change how she saw everything. The strangest thing about Paris Jackson's childhood is that the man the world saw was not necessarily the man she knew at home. For years, millions of people saw Michael Jackson as a performer first. The gloves, the dance moves, the enormous crowds, the strange headlines. But Paris grew up seeing another side of him. In a 2017 Rolling Stone interview, she described her father as someone who could be funny, protective, and deeply involved in her life. She also made it clear that she never needed the public to convince her who her father was. For Paris, Michael was simply her dad. That sounds simple, but it was not. Paris was growing up in a world where almost everything about her family could become a headline. Even something as ordinary as going outside could become complicated. She and her brother sometimes wore masks in public, so they could experience normal activities without being immediately recognized. As a child, Paris did not fully understand why. She only knew that her father wanted to protect them. Years later, she began to understand what that protection meant. Michael Jackson was one of the most recognizable people on Earth. A normal family outing could turn into a crowd of strangers. A photograph could travel around the world within hours. Even his children could become part of the spectacle. So Michael tried to create a private world for them. Paris has remembered that world as much more disciplined than people might expect. Her recent 2026 comments added another layer to that picture. She explained that Neverland was not simply a playground for his children. She and her brothers had schoolwork, chores, and rules. The rides and other attractions were treated as rewards rather than something they could use whenever they wanted. That is a very different picture from the fantasy many people imagined. And there was another part of Paris's childhood that would become important later. She eventually realized that people outside the family did not see Michael the way she did. In the 2017 Rolling Stone interview, she recalled reaching an age when she understood that much of the world had a completely different view of her father. That realization created a painful divide between her private memories and the public arguments surrounding him. But Paris did not simply erase her own memories because other people disagreed with them. She held on to them. Even in 2026, she has said that her relationship with her father is deeply personal and that she no longer feels obligated to publicly explain it to everyone. She described that private connection as something beautiful that belongs to her. And that may be the most important clue in this entire story. Paris is not claiming that the public should forget the controversy surrounding Michael Jackson. She is saying that the public did not live her childhood. She did. And then, when she was only 11 years old, the person at the center of that childhood suddenly disappeared. That loss would change Paris forever, because the next chapter would force a child who had spent years being protected from the world to stand directly in front of it. There was one rule Paris Jackson understood long before she understood why the world cared so much about her family. She could not simply be a normal child. When Paris and her brothers went outside with their father, Michael sometimes covered their faces with masks or other disguises. To a child, that could seem strange. Why hide your face when everyone else was allowed to show theirs? Paris later explained that she was confused by it when she was young. As she grew older, however, she understood the reason. Michael wanted his children to have some privacy and experience ordinary life without being recognized everywhere they went. That protection tells us something important about the world Paris was born into. Michael Jackson could not walk through a shopping center like an ordinary father. Crowds could appear almost instantly. Cameras followed him. Fans wanted photographs. Strangers wanted a piece of his attention. And his children could easily become part of that spectacle. So Michael tried to create a barrier between his family and the public. But the strange part is that the children did not simply grow up hidden away in one magical estate. Paris has recently explained that she spent only the first few years of her life at Neverland. She and her brothers were homeschooled, and their days were built around schoolwork and chores. Even the famous attractions at Neverland were not treated as their personal playground. Paris said Michael made it very clear that those attractions were meant for underprivileged and terminally ill children. The rides became rewards. Finish your work. Follow the rules. Then, perhaps, you could enjoy some of the fun. That detail completely changes the picture. To someone looking from the outside, Neverland looked like a place where 3 children could have everything. But Paris remembers a father who wanted them to understand responsibility before privilege. And there was another part of her childhood that was far more complicated. Paris eventually realized that her father's fame was not simply a job. It shaped almost every part of their lives. She did not immediately understand why strangers screamed when they saw him. She did not fully understand why people wanted pictures. And she certainly could not understand why her father was sometimes the subject of intense public controversy. Then she began noticing the difference between the Michael Jackson she knew and the Michael Jackson the world talked about. In her 2017 Rolling Stone interview, Paris described her father as a funny and loving person and spoke about how difficult it was to see people attack someone she knew so differently. That conflict would follow her into adulthood, because when your father is one of the most famous people in history, his story becomes part of your story whether you want it to or not. And for Paris, that story became even heavier after June 2009. She was only 11 years old when Michael Jackson died. The protected childhood suddenly ended. The masks could no longer hide the grief. And the little girl who had spent years trying to understand why the world was so interested in her father was about to experience the most painful answer of all. The day Paris Jackson lost her father, she also lost the private world that had protected her. Michael Jackson died on June 25, 2009 at the age of 50. Paris was only 11. For a child who had spent much of her life being shielded from cameras and strangers, the sudden loss became a completely different kind of exposure. The family was grieving, but the whole world was watching. 12 days later, Paris stood on a stage at the public memorial service in Los Angeles. What happened next was not carefully planned. In an August 2026 interview on Call Her Daddy, Paris explained that nobody in the family seemed ready to speak when the moment arrived. Her brothers did not step forward, and Paris suddenly decided that she would. She has never even gone back to watch the footage of herself giving that speech. She was just 11 years old. Imagine being that young and suddenly standing in front of thousands of people, with millions more watching from home, while trying to say goodbye to your father. For Paris, it happened almost instinctively, but the emotional cost did not disappear when the memorial ended. She has since described the period after Michael's death as a difficult transition. In her recent interview, she said losing it became a kind of crash course in learning social skills and dealing with a world she had previously experienced very differently. The timing made everything harder. Before Michael died, Paris had a father who could help create distance between his children and the public. After his death, that barrier was gone. Suddenly, Paris was not only grieving a parent, she was also the daughter of Michael Jackson, and people want to know what she remembered, what she believed, and what really happened inside their family. That pressure followed her for years. In 2026, Paris explained that she once felt she owed the public details about her relationship with her father. She felt pressure to post about him on birthdays, Father's Day, and the anniversary of his death. Now she sees things differently. She says she does not owe anyone access to that relationship. Her memories of Michael belong to her, and she is allowed to keep them private. That is a major change. The little girl who once walked onto a stage because nobody else moved is now an adult, choosing when she wants to speak and when she does not. And that decision becomes even more important when we look at the questions surrounding Michael's life, because Paris has memories of her father that cannot simply be replaced by headlines. But she also knows that her memories are personal. So where does that leave the truth? To understand that, we have to separate what Paris actually experienced from the stories other people have told about Michael Jackson. And that is where the most complicated part of this story begins. For years, people wanted Paris Jackson to answer one question: what was Michael really like behind closed doors? But Paris has slowly made it clear that she does not see her childhood as a courtroom where she has to prove anything to anyone. That became especially clear in 2019, when the documentary Leaving Neverland brought renewed attention to allegations against her father. The film featured Wade Robson and James Safechuck, who alleged that Michael Jackson sexually abused them as children. Michael Jackson had denied allegations during his lifetime, and he was acquitted of criminal charges in 2005. The Jackson estate and family strongly rejected the claims presented in the documentary. Paris's response was complicated. At first, some of her social media comments were interpreted as a defense of her father. But shortly afterward, she explained that defending Michael was not her responsibility. She supported her cousin Taj Jackson, who was publicly defending Michael, while saying that she did not see that role as hers. That distinction is important. Paris was not saying that she had personally investigated every allegation. She was saying something much more personal. She knew the man she knew, and that man was her father. Years later, Paris became even more protective of that private relationship. In her 2026 Call Her Daddy interview, she explained that she no longer feels obligated to publicly post about Michael on birthdays, Father's Day, or other important dates simply because people expect her to. Her memories belong to her. That may be the clearest answer she has ever given, because there's a huge difference between saying, I know everything that happened, and saying, I know what my own childhood felt like. Paris has chosen the second. She has described Michael as funny and caring. She has remembered him teaching her, protecting her privacy, and creating rules around school, chores, and privileges. Her latest account at Neverland also pushes back against the idea that she simply spent her childhood living like a princess inside an amusement park. But there's another painful truth. Paris has also spoken openly about how badly she struggled after Michael died. She has discussed substance abuse beginning in her early teens, and has said she became sober in early 2020. Those experiences show that remembering a loving parent and struggling with grief can exist at the same time. One does not cancel out the other. That is why the phrase, "what she saw behind closed doors," can be misleading. Paris has revealed pieces of that private world. She has not claimed to possess some secret master key that explains every controversy surrounding her father, and the available evidence does not allow us to turn her childhood memories into proof of every claim made about Michael Jackson. What her story does reveal is something quieter. A child can know a parent in a way the public never will. A child can remember love, discipline, fear, confusion, loss, and protection all at once. And sometimes the truth is not one dramatic secret. Sometimes the truth is that a family lived inside a reality almost impossible for outsiders to understand. But there's still one question left. If Paris's memories are so different from the stories surrounding Michael Jackson, where does that leave the truth about what happened inside Neverland? To answer that, we have to put emotion aside for a moment and look carefully at what is documented, what was alleged, and what remains impossible to prove. The biggest truth in Paris Jackson's story is also the easiest one to miss. She has revealed a great deal about her childhood, but she has never claimed that her memories give the world every answer about Michael Jackson. And that distinction matters. Paris has described a father who was funny, protective, and deeply involved in her childhood. In her August 2026 interview, she again remembered him as her best friend and explained that many of the strange rules surrounding her childhood were designed to give her and her brother some sense of normal life. But Michael Jackson's private life also became the center of serious allegations. In 2005, a California jury found Jackson not guilty on all charges in a criminal case involving allegations that he sexually abused a 13-year-old boy at Neverland. The jury's verdict was a legal finding that the prosecution had not proved the charges beyond a reasonable doubt. Years later, Leaving Neverland brought separate allegations from Wade Robson and James Safechuck back into worldwide attention. Those allegations were disputed by Jackson's estate and family, and they should not be presented as established criminal findings against Jackson. The important point is that these controversies exist alongside the documented fact that Jackson was acquitted in the 2005 criminal trial, and Paris was a child when much of this history was unfolding. That means her memories can tell us something real about her experience, but they cannot automatically prove or disprove every allegation made by other people. This is where sensational headlines often go wrong. The phrase, "what she saw behind closed doors," makes it sound as though Paris has secretly exposed one final answer. She has not. What she has actually done is something more personal. She has described a childhood that was highly controlled, but not necessarily the way outsiders imagined. She remembered schoolwork, chores, rewards, masks in public, moving from place to place, and a father who wanted his children protected from the enormous attention surrounding him. Then Michael died. Paris was 11. She was suddenly forced from protected childhood into a world where everyone wanted to know what she remembered about him. At his 2009 memorial, she unexpectedly stepped forward and spoke publicly about her father. More than a decade later, she admitted that she has never even watched a recording of that speech. Today, she is choosing something different: privacy. Paris has said that her relationship with Michael is personal and that she does not owe the public constant explanations about him. She can remember the father she loved without becoming responsible for resolving every argument surrounding his life. And perhaps that is a real revelation. There may never be one sentence from Paris Jackson that makes every mystery surrounding Michael Jackson disappear. What we have instead is a daughter remembering her father from inside the family, while the rest of the world remembers him from headlines, courtrooms, documentaries, music videos, and decades of controversy. Those perspectives do not always match, and they do not have to. Paris's story reminds us that fame can make a private family life almost impossible to keep private. It also reminds us that grief does not end simply because the cameras move on. Behind the celebrity was a child. Behind the headlines was a daughter. And behind the questions was a young woman trying to understand her father, her childhood, and eventually herself. That may be the closest thing to the truth Paris is willing to give us. Not a shocking secret, not a final verdict, just her own memories, and the right to decide which parts of them belong to the world. Do you think Paris Jackson's personal memories give us a better understanding of Michael Jackson, or should his public controversies always remain separate from the way his children remember him? Let me know in the comments below.